So the Science Advisory Board was established when the Toxic Use Reduction Act was passed in 1989. The management of the Science Advisory Board was designated to TURI, and we have been managing it, since the mid-90s when the board really got off the ground. The board's primary role is considering petitions to add or delete substances from the TURA list of toxic or hazardous substances, and they make recommendations to the Institute accordingly. In 2006, there were amendments to TURA passed, and the SAB also was given the role of making recommendations for higher and lower hazard substances. And the Institute can also call on the Science Advisory Board for scientific or technical advice whenever there's a TURA-related issue that we need that input on. So the board consists of 11 members. Those members are appointed by the governor, and they can be nominated by different agencies. So 3 of the members are nominated by the Institute, 3 by the Secretary of Environmental Affairs, 3 by the Secretary of Economic Affairs, 1 by Labor, and 1 by Health and Human Services. The members serve 3-year terms, and those terms can be renewed. And again, the governor makes the final appointments to the board. So it is a process getting people appointed. To be nominated to the Science Advisory Board, an individual must have extensive professional experience in one of these areas: toxicology, occupational health, environmental health, epidemiology, environmental science, or chemistry. So usually that comes in the form of an advanced degree. And we're looking for expertise that balances the board. So we want to be a couple members deep in each one of those areas of expertise. The Science Advisory Board and the TURA list of toxic or hazardous substances is a little different than a lot of the other lists out there, whereas we're looking at the chemical as a whole rather than just one particular aspect. So we really do need a broad range of expertise. And at the same time, we want to be a couple members deep in each type of expertise to contribute to that conversation. So some other things to know about the Science Advisory Board is it makes recommendations based solely on the science of the substance. So policy issues come in later in the process, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. They also make recommendations based upon the inherent hazard of the substance. They're not risk assessments or risk evaluations. So we're recognizing that the inherent hazard of the substance matters. People don't always use proper PPE in our experience in industry. People have spills and accidents. So we're trying to be as preventative as possible in looking at the inherent hazard rather than bringing a risk assessment into it. The Science Advisory Board uses an expert judgment approach. So the Science Advisory Board reviews information, discusses it at public meeting, in an open public meeting, that's open to the public. And they bring their expertise to make those recommendations. So criteria for listing chemicals under TURA. So we do have a very lengthy document that is describing these criteria and the process as a whole that I'm talking about here today. We call that our decision-making document, and I think Pam is going to plop that in the chat for us. But basically, we are looking for one of these 3 things: human health hazards or environmental hazards or other hazards. So under human health hazards, significant effects that we would be looking for there are cancer, reproductive effects, neurological disorders, genetic mutations, heritable conditions, chronic conditions, and acute toxicity. For environmental hazards, we're looking for toxicity and either persistence in the environment or bioaccumulation or other impacts like ozone depletion, climate change, toxic breakdown products. And then also we're looking at any other adverse health effects from the likely use, handling, or disposal of the substance. And that is in Appendix C a little bit more fully, if you would like to take a look at that when it's in the chat. So to gather information for this scientific review, we're looking for health hazards, environmental and ecosystem hazards, safety and physical hazards, the chemical and physical characteristics of a substance. We might look to health-based exposure limits and values to get that information, or environmental exposure values. And we also look at global environmental impacts. So again, we're really looking at a very broad look at the chemical when we're bringing it to the Science Advisory Board. So where do we get all this information? So this is like a start of where we would start looking for this information. So typically we would put together an environmental health and safety summary for the board when we're starting to look at a chemical. And there may be other agencies, authoritative bodies that have done large reviews of chemicals. So sometimes those can be helpful as well. But basically we're looking in PubChem and ComTalks, Cheminformatics, and ECHA to find information to start off with. Pharos, we're looking at IARC, green screens, and all these other resources that we're looking at here. So there's really a large effort to do a big background review on each chemical before we bring it to the Science Advisory Board. And this is a process that continues. There's a big effort before we start looking at a chemical. But it also builds during the process. Certain Science Advisory Board members might think of another resource that they would like to look at or add in. There may be stakeholders that are providing input, and we're adding that information in. So that builds as we're going along while we're reviewing a chemical. So just to give you a look at the EHS summaries. So this is kind of how it would look. And this is for one of the quaternary ammonium compound subcategories, the alkyl dimethyl benzyl ammonium chloride subcategory. And again, you can see the physical characteristics, the safety and physical hazards, health hazards, and environmental and ecosystem hazards. So this is kind of an overview of the information that's been found. I think this one for ADVAC was 28 pages. And then we would also provide to the board, so there's little blurbs in there that are, maybe summaries from the studies that we've looked at, but then the board would also get the actual studies that came from, so they can review the study themselves. The board is bringing that expertise, that deep expertise, where they're, looking at the study design, where they're looking at for and effect at the right stage of development. Were there are enough subjects studied? Were there any drawbacks of the study that we would be concerned about making conclusions based upon that? So they're really taking that deep dive, and this is the overview that we kind of provide to get started. So all of that feeds into the TURA program decision-making process. And we're going to come back to this slide as we go through the different examples today. So we start with the initiation of listing or delisting, and then TURI gathers that information. So that's what we've just talked about there. We bring it to the Science Advisory Board that we just talked about, and those are, again, open public meetings. The Science Advisory Board deliberates and makes recommendations. And I think for each of the substances that we're talking about today, we had a handful of meetings on each of those groups of substances before the Science Advisory Board made a recommendation. And again, those are open public meetings. We put out an agenda a month ahead of time. We solicit stakeholder input. If there is any scientific information that we have not found, the stakeholders feel that we need to see, that's provided to the board. And then the board makes that recommendation. Once the Science Advisory Board has made a recommendation, TURI drafts a policy analysis. I'll talk about the policy analysis in a little bit. And then we bring it to our advisory committee. So our advisory committee is a different stakeholder group, and they're bringing in policy input. So there are multiple stakeholders in that group, people from businesses, big and small, people from environmental groups, people from labor. So a variety of inputs that is providing us some policy context. So they might tell us information about how they see the chemical used in industry, alternatives that they know are out there, maybe experiences of whether they worked or not, and financial considerations. So that kind of policy input comes at the advisory committee part of the process. Once we get that input, we revise the policy analysis, and maybe we're going back and trying to answer some questions that the advisory committee asked us. And then we present the policy analysis to the administrative council. The administrative council is the body that has the ability to either add or delete from the TURA list, or to make higher or lower hazard substances. So once we've presented at the administrative council, like, there are often comments that we're going to go back and review as well. And so this little piece of the flow chart loops a little bit. So we may make changes, present it back at the advisory committee, and then present it back at the administrative council again. And then the administrative council would vote to open a public comment period. After that happens, we draft regulations, we hold a public comment period and a hearing. We respond to comments if there are any, and then we would present the response to comments back to the administrative council. Then we would finalize regulations, and there would be implementation in the TURA program. So as you can see, there's quite a lot of process here. It takes a pretty long time from the initiation of listing or delisting until TURA program implementation, usually years. And I should also have mentioned, like, the advisory committee meetings are public meetings, the administrative council meetings are public meetings. So there's quite a bit of opportunity for the public to engage. So to talk a little bit specifically about the policy analyses, so TURI is responsible for generating that once the Science Advisory Board makes a recommendation. And so the first part of the policy analysis is the summary of the science that the board reviewed. So as you might have gathered from the slides on the science, there is a pretty, intensive and deep scientific review, and we're just bringing the summary of that to the policy analysis. We next try to assess use in Massachusetts. Of course, that's really challenging when there's no information about that use that's publicly available. Usually in the case of listing, if it's the case of delisting, then that's easier because we have information to do that. So we can gather that information from Tier 2, from our experience in industry, and oftentimes there are other resources that we can try to glean some uses from. But overall, kind of tricky because there's no really solid place to find that information. We're also bringing information about potential alternatives. So having alternatives available is not a prerequisite to listing a chemical under TURA, but we do like to assess what we know about alternatives at the time we're recommending a listing. We also provide information on other relevant regulations. And finally, we assess the impact on the TURA program. So going forward here today, we're going to give 3 examples of the 3 most recent substances and categories that the Science Advisory Board has looked at. We're going to start off with the aryl phosphate esters category, which is the most recent group that the SAB has looked at. So we've initiated the listing of that. TURI has gathered the information, and the Science Advisory Board has deliberated and made a recommendation. And I think we did that over about 5 meetings. We're in the process right now of drafting the policy analysis, and then all these boxes in gray will have to be done before we could actually implement the addition of aryl phosphate esters to the list. And with that, I will give it over to Karen Thomas to talk a little bit in more detail about the aryl phosphate ester category.
Okay, thanks, Heather. Hi, everyone. Colin, you can go to the next slide. So first of all, why phosphate esters? Back in 2020, the Massachusetts passed the flame retardant law that actually banned a number of flame retardants. And within that law, the Science Advisory Board was written in to provide information and feedback and opinions to DEP about various flame retardants. And so that's how we got into looking at flame retardants. And in doing that, the aryl phosphate esters category appeared as a potential substitute for some of these banned flame retardants. And because flame retardants have a very long history of regrettable substitution, TURI asked the Science Advisory Board to take a look at this category to see what their opinion was about them being used as a substitute. Okay, Colin. So first of all, what they are aryl phosphate esters. They are the most common member of the category is the triphenyl phosphate. That's the structure in the top right. And everything else is basically a variation of that. I'll show you some more structures in a few slides. They're used as flame retardants, plasticizers, lubricants. And some of the products you might find them in are hydraulic fluids, textile coatings, and plastic materials. So the Science Advisory Board looked at this potential category of chemicals during 4 meetings from December 2024 through June 2025. And those meeting minutes are available on our website if anyone is interested in the minutia of what they discussed. The hazard endpoints for this category that percolated to the top as being most important were aquatic toxicity, bioaccumulation, neurodevelopmental effects, and endocrine disruption. And as Heather said, the Science Advisory Board has made their decision as of the June 2025 meeting, and TURI is now drafting the policy analysis. So these are my categories. They're based on chemistry, but they're not official by any means, but this is just how we looked at each subgroup of the triphenyl phosphate. So in box number 1 is triphenyl phosphate and the various ways that that can be modified with straight chains and fewer phenyl groups. Box number 2, the various methyl additions to triphenyl phosphate. Box 3 is the isopropyl version, and that one has gotten a lot of attention through TSCA. That's the PIP 3:1. And number 4 are the butyl derivatives, and then box number 5 are the basically joining 2 of those together. And all in all, looking for all the aryl phosphate esters in these subgroups that are currently in use, according to TSCA, we had about 30 chemicals that we were looking at, 30 CAS numbers. Okay, Colin. So the Science Advisory Board will start with the criteria that Heather covered earlier. And then because this is a category and not a single chemical that they're looking at, they need to ask themselves the very simple question, are the potential members of the category similar enough structurally that they would be assumed to behave similarly with regard to toxicity, which is quite a fun exercise, especially when you don't have data on all of the members of the category, and you may have a lot of data on some members, but definitely there's some decisions to be made as to what might happen with chemicals that have much less data. So when we're getting started in the big picture on this category, we gather all of the policy documents and the state, federal, and international research that has been done on this category. And this category was especially confusing and difficult because people call it many different names. And sometimes they draw the boundaries maybe just like a phosphate-based flame retardant, for example. So there's a lot of subgroups and there's a lot of larger categories. So it's a little bit, this was tricky, not to mention all the various names. But we also look at the chemical databases, CompTox in particular, and just doing a broad search, we started with about 29 policy documents. And from that, we start to see the picture of the group of chemicals, why they came into the regulatory realm, and we start to focus what endpoints are going to be most important. And then, as I said, we had approximately 30 cast numbers. So one thing the board really likes to see right up front is the physical and chemical characteristics, specifically KOW and molecular weight, for example. They want to look at all the structures. And then we're looking, as we determined, we are looking more closely on the neurological and developmental toxicity for this particular category, endocrine disruption, and environmental hazards. So then we dig in deep into the areas that we've determined are most important. And for this particular category, there are a lot of neurological and developmental studies out there. But as our member said, some of them are fishing expeditions. So we're trying to look at the studies that are looking at actual environmental concentrations that might be possible. And because they were so numerous, the academic studies in this area, we focused on the last 5 years, which is an unusual thing, but every group of chemicals has its own personality, so we do what's necessary. In the end, the board looked at 67 research articles and 12 that looked at endocrine disruption, but 67 on neurological and developmental toxicity of all of the members that we could find. And then on the environmental side of things, chronic aquatic toxicity ended up being the most important endpoint, and bioaccumulation. And on the aquatic toxicity side of things, those research articles were more like 1980s, late 70s, and we dug up 25 research papers that all of the policy and regulatory groups seem to be pointing to from the beginning of these chemicals in commerce. And our aquatic toxicity board member, expert, narrowed it down to 4 studies that seem to be the most valid looking at them all these years later. So we focused on 4 studies, and they also had bioaccumulation data as well. So after discussing all of this back and forth, the board asking for more information, less information, they ended up with the following recommendation, and that is to list aryl phosphate esters due to evidence of aquatic toxicity and bioaccumulation. And then off to the right are their supplemental statements to help explain their reasoning for that determination. And they also added to the recommendation that there are additional concerns for persistence, endocrine disruption, and neurodevelopmental effects. And again, with supplemental statements that are very detailed. And if anyone has questions about this particular category and the specifics, I'd love to talk more about it. But because we have so much to talk about today, just reach out to me afterward and I can go into any level of detail you like.
Okay, next slide.
Is that,
Yep.
Are you all finished, Karen, with the recommendation?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, my name is Colin Hanahan. Good morning, everybody. I'm the policy analyst at Turi, and I will be talking more about the policy analysis, naturally. And we'll be using the example of carbon nanotubes and nanofibers, which is a chemical category that was already considered by the SAB and is a bit farther along in the process towards potential listing. than aryl phosphate esters. So we have drafted the policy analysis, and now we're kind of in the phase of getting input from the advisory committee and comments from stakeholders. But first, to just take a quick step back to see where this came from, in June 2020, Clean Water Action and Public Employees for Environmental Responsibility filed a petition to list carbon nanotubes and nanofibers. So that's kind of another example of where these requests to the SAB could come from. And they requested to list carbon nanotubes and carbon nanofibers as a higher hazard substance, which would result in a lower reporting threshold, down to 1,000 pounds a year from 10,000 pounds a year, with 10 or 25,000 pounds a year, which is the normal TURA thresholds. And it also proposed to include CNTs and CNFs on TURA list as a group. So similar to the category approach that Karen was talking about. So the SAB did their thing. They looked at carbon nanotubes, both multi-walled and single-walled, and carbon nanofibers over a series of meetings. And they recommended that they be added as 3 distinct categories, with multi-walled carbon nanotubes being a higher hazard substance due to evidence of pulmonary toxicity, lung cancer, mesothelioma, and environmental persistence, while they recommended that single-walled carbon nanotubes and carbon nanofibers be standard categories. So you can see that the recommendation of the SAB was different than the original petition. So that's something to keep in mind, that can happen based on what they see and the hazards they see. That's what they make their recommendation based on. So with that, it triggered TURI's time to start working on the policy analysis. So a really big part of the policy analysis was to see where these materials are used in Massachusetts. And seeing where something is used before it's on the TURA list is difficult, especially with these materials, which are kind of on the up and up, are used a lot in research, but we did our best. We looked into a ton of different sources. There was a survey done by the Office of Technical Assistance, which is our sister agency that also implements TURA. We looked at EFCRA Tier 2 data. We looked a lot at industrial databases such as EDSCO and the S&P Capital IQ database. And we also looked at regulatory databases such as that of TSCA and EU's database on chemicals registered under REACH. So we were able to get, kind of a big picture of which users might be using carbon nanomaterials, that is carbon nanotubes and carbon nanofibers in Massachusetts, what sectors they might be in, what particular use they're using it for. Are they using it in electronics? Are they using it in advanced materials? And then we tried to really identify which would be most likely to file should carbon nanotubes and carbon nanofibers be listed under TURA. And you can see that in that overview in the draft policy analysis, which is online and I think will be shared in the chat. So another key part of the policy analysis that Heather mentioned earlier is doing a kind of wholesale regulatory review all over the world of regulations and initiatives, and not even necessarily mandatory regulations, but voluntary reporting, for example, relevant to carbon nanofibers and carbon nanomaterials. So at the international level, the OECD has a strategic program on safety evaluation and risk assessment that's looking at the workplace hazards, for example, and the health hazards of carbon nanomaterials. In the EU, when a regulated entity wants to use a nanomaterial, they have to register it under REACH, and they actually have to provide some additional information on the different forms of the nanomaterial. At the federal level, there's a record keeping rule, meaning that people using, not people, but facilities using nanomaterials might have to provide information to the EPA. There are some significant new use rules which somewhat control the use of multi-walled carbon nanotubes, mostly workplace controls. That's under the new chemical program. And then even at the state and local level, in Cambridge and Berkeley, those are two, research hubs, which might be using a lot of nanomaterials. There's been some information requests based on concerns over the nanomaterial use there. And so we take a look at all of this. We see that most of these regulations are related to information collection and, workplace risk management, not necessarily the same thing that would happen should these materials be listed under TORA. So the next thing that the policy analysis tries to do is look at the opportunities for toxics use reduction with regards to the use of carbon nanofibers and carbon nanotubes. And we're trying to answer the question of, are there opportunities to reduce the use of these substances and their associated hazards along the life cycle without compromising their unique characteristics and potential benefits to society? And that's, specific to these materials, which are maybe a little different than other things we've listed under TORA in the past. There are a lot of different applications that are springing up, and we're learning a lot about them. But based on this kind of in-depth review, this literature review, also looking at, industry white papers and briefings, we were able to see these kind of 4 areas of TUR opportunities. Product and process design innovations, changing the shape of the nanomaterial, for example, looking at non-carbon based nanomaterials, looking at more natural materials, structural modifications, treatments and processing after the carbon nanomaterials have been synthesized, and then also looking at non-nanomaterials for those applications. So you can have a look at the policy analysis online. It's an interesting document, and especially interesting in the context of carbon nanomaterials. And right now we're taking a look at some comments we've received to make some changes, so it's not final. But as of now, the policy analysis, what it does right at the top, you'll see that it agrees with the recommendation of the Science Advisory Board to add them to the list. So now we'll go back to Heather and we'll see even farther along in the process what it looks like after the policy analysis has been finalized, the final steps towards possible implementation.
Thanks, Colin. So finally, I'll talk about quaternary ammonium compounds. They are the substance that is furthest back from the present. So the Science Advisory Board most recently worked on aryl phosphates. Before that was carbon nanotubes and carbon nanofibers. And before that was quaternary ammonium compounds. So it's furthest along in the TURA process. So we have been through all the steps in dark blue. We've had the Science Advisory Board part of the process, presented at the advisory committee, presented at the administrative council. The council voted to open the public comment period, drafted regulations. We held a public comment period and a hearing, and we're in the process of responding to comments right now. So So just a little bit left to go on quaternary ammonium compounds after completing that response to comments. So just for a little bit of background, quats are a group of substances that are primarily used for disinfection. They're also used for wood preservation. There are some applications in personal care products, such as like mouthwash, eye drops, and that kind of thing for the disinfectant properties. Turi initiated the quat review during the pandemic when the use of quats was becoming more widespread, but quats had been on our radar prior to that, and that was, just a little bit of a push to pay a little bit more attention. And the Science Advisory Board recommended listing 24 specific quaternary ammonium compounds in the subcategories of ADVAC and DDAC. And they listed them they made the recommendation to list them based on respiratory irritation and inflammation, corrosivity, hazard to aquatic life, and environmental fate and persistence. So again, that public comment period has closed. The program is responding to comments. And then the response to comments will next be presented at the Administrative Council, which again is an open public meeting. So if you want to be on lists to receive notice of those public meetings, let me know. For the Administrative Council and the Advisory Committee, Tiffany Skogstrom manages those groups, but I can pass your information along to her, or if you have her information, she's the person that you would ask directly. So you can see the response to comments at that council meeting that is not yet scheduled, but will be coming up. And then I did want to mention on the next slide all the work that our disinfection lab has done to find safer alternatives to quaternary ammonium compounds. So there's been a lot of work going on at Turi to find those safer alternatives from even before the pandemic. There are chemical alternatives that are safer for some applications. Caprylic acid, citric acid, lactic acid, and hypochlorous acid, also hydrogen peroxide and certain alcohols. The substances with the star have been evaluated by Safer Choice and are considered safer active ingredients. And the lab has also assessed non-chemical alternatives such as steam and UV light. So there is a lot of work going on at Turi for those safer alternatives, and there are several publications and presentations that have reviewed that. These are also listed in the policy analysis, so I think those documents will be going in the chat, so you could take a look, and always feel free to reach out to our laboratory staff here at Turi for additional help with that. And with that, I think that's the last of the Turi slides. Our contact information is here. Feel free to reach out to any member of the team with any additional questions, or I think we'll have a little bit of time at the end of the presentation today to answer questions too. So happy to answer anything that we forgot to mention today or that you had questions about and we didn't address. And with that, I'll hand it back to Pam.
Thank you. Thank you, Heather and Colin and Karen. Great job. Yes, Colin, thank you for showing this. I just wanted to remind folks, we do have 2 more webinars that are happening over the course of the year, the end of this year. So you can stop sharing now. I just want to make a comment that how grateful I would be if I were a toxics use reduction planner or an individual or a company that the program is doing this deep dive into trying to understand what the hazards are associated with these chemical categories. It's incredibly complex. And so you have done an amazing job of really diving into it. We do have a minute. If anybody has a pressing question that they want to ask this program, I'm happy to give you an opportunity. You can just raise your hand or just unmute yourself. One of the things that also I want to note here is that we're looking at chemical categories, right? We're not looking at individual chemicals at this moment. So each of the examples that we talked about here are categories of chemical that are that much more complex. So any comment as to the pros and cons of that approach, Heather or Colin or Karen?
Sorry, I just saw that Daryl had asked a question in the chat that I wanted to answer. So Daryl asked whether other nanomaterials are being looked at. And the petition to list carbon nanotubes and fibers was specific to carbon nanotubes and carbon nanofibers. So that is all that we looked at. I use the word all in a funny way because it's still like a really complex category of chemicals. But no, we don't have any immediate plans to look at additional nanomaterials. And all the work that has been done so far is specific to carbon nanotubes and carbon nanofibers.
Great. Pros and cons to the chemical category approach.
So, the reason that we look at categories is to avoid regrettable substitution. So we don't want companies to switch from, one hazard to another very similar chemical that is not yet listed. And as I think I've shown today, the process of listing chemicals is very, very time consuming. So there's really there's no way to keep up if you're doing it individually. We recognize that we don't want companies to switch to something equally hazardous because of the hazard and also because of the time it takes a company to make a switch. That's a sunk effort for them if they make a switch and then they have to switch again. So looking at categories, helps us prevent regrettable substitution. It is challenging to look at categories, and we're still figuring some of that out. And I did mean to mention while I was talking that we're also, getting up to speed on computational toxicology tools and how they can assist us learn more about chemicals and how they can be applied to the regulatory process, which is the regulatory process itself is challenging. So I always love when I see somebody using computational toxicology in the design phase of when they're using chemicals. So I'll just put that out there. But always when you're looking at a category, you've got a couple chemicals that are data rich and then a bunch that are data poor, and you're having to try to make the parallels between them. So it is a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a question here from Jen Jackson, who's asking if you could speak to the criteria by which the SIB evaluates literature or studies on chemical categories and hazards.
I'm just looking at I'm just looking at the text here. So as I mentioned, the Science Advisory Board is a group of experts, and they use an expert judgment method in open meetings. So we rely on their expert judgment when they're reviewing the study. And then they're discussing the study with their expert peers in open meetings. So they might, say, I don't like the way this study was designed. There weren't enough subjects. They did not look for the effect at the right stage of the process. They might be unhappy that only one group of scientists or lab is finding a certain effect and not others. So that's what we use their expertise for. So there's no matrix with checkboxes on whether, a study is good or not, but we use that heavy expertise that the board has to evaluate the study. And then that is discussed in open meeting as they make their recommendation, the reasons why they're, this study is supporting the recommendation that they're making, and this one's not.
Yeah.
I think the minutes sometimes have information on what they think of a study, what its quality is.
Yep. So oftentimes that's captured in the minutes, especially a particular study that is a reason for a recommendation.
And that information is available on our website.
It is, yes.
That's great. Thank you so much. So thank you again for each of your presentations and for the really deep and thoughtful approach the Tour program takes to evaluating chemicals and chemical categories and their the hazards that they present. So I'm going to stop the Q&A for us now and introduce Jerker Lichthart, who is the chemicals technical lead at ChemSec, and Yerker is going to be sharing with us information about the SIN list, substitute it now list. Yerker, are you there and ready to go? There he is.
Yeah, I'm here.
Terrific. Thank you
Yes.
so much for joining us. And if you want to go ahead and share your slides. Perfect.
Tell me if it's working.
It's working great. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Pam, and for the kind introduction and allowing me to be here today and present what we've been doing with the SIN list in the last 18 years, I would say. Actually, I was hired for ChemSec to initiate the work with the SIN list 18 years ago. So the work started 18 years ago, but the launch was 17 years ago. It took a year to create the first SIN list. And Pam told me that you were interested in knowing kind of the success factors. Why did it become so successful? Because I would say it is successful. It's widespread and it's used more or less all over the world. So I'm gonna kind of give you a journey from sin to win today. I'm not sure if everyone is aware of who we are in ChemSec and what we're doing. But we are an NGO, so we are a non-governmental organization. We're trying to drive the political discussions and drive the political agenda on what to deal with the chemical topics. We are very narrow in that sense, but we're only talking about chemicals, so hazardous chemicals, and to ban the most hazardous chemicals in use today. And we're a bit different from other environmental organizations because we are also cooperating a lot together with companies and working with investors. And we challenge the companies to improve so they become better. Because sometimes it's much more efficient to drive the companies than to drive regulation. And we're doing this by developing online tools that can be helpful. So not just saying this is bad or you doing bad, but this is how you can improve. So really showing a problem and the way forward, how to deal with the problem. And of course, we're also dealing with investors. So we're informing them on the risks and also the opportunities which are in the chemical industry, because there are lots of risks, but also very many opportunities if you invest in the right company. And we have a vision, and my personal vision, I think, is the best part is with ChemSec on a permitification, because I'm one of those guys. I want to be out of my job. When we don't have anything to do anymore in ChemSec, I would be very, very happy to retire. I don't think that's going to happen in the closest decades or so, but that is really what we're striving for, to be out of a job. Just to mention as well that even though we are working together with these big companies, especially in the ChemSec business group, we never take any money from these companies. So we are completely funded by government funds and also from charity funds in the EU and the US. So we never accept any money from nor from investors nor from these companies that we are working together with. So we have a number of tools. And the first and foremost is the SIN list, of course. And but we also have other tools, and talking about investors' work, that it's ChemScore. When we look at chemical companies, we're ranking between 40 and 50 of the world's largest chemical producers from 4 different angles. So how transparent they are, what's their how good are they dealing with the persistent chemicals, phasing those out, and also generally speaking on their toxic portfolio. The PFAS guide to help companies steer clear of PFAS, marketplace, which is a safer alternatives, and then SIN producers showing who is actually producing the hazardous chemicals in use today. You can find all these on the web's link here on the slide. So, moving over to the SIN list. So 2008, that was the launch of the first SIN list. And we have the first little logo we have there where we really spelled out SIN, the substitute it now. Because that is what it's all about, to substitute the worst chemicals. And we've been updating the SIN list like incrementally ever since. So every year or once or twice a year, we're doing small updates. But we have had a few large updates, and that's the first one in 2008. In 2011, we added endocrine disrupting chemicals. And we call that from ambition to action, because endocrine disrupting chemicals had been mentioned several times in regulation and in discussions in the policy, but never really took off before. And in 2014, we focused on PBT substances. So, and also added a few more endocrine disrupting chemicals, but really having a focus and emphasis on PBTs and VPVBs. That was new for that update. And in 2019, we also added PBTs and PMTs. So the M is for mobility. So that is substances which are highly persistent and try to spread in water. So bioaccumulative, they spread in the food chain. However, mobile substances, they spread in water. So they can spread worldwide and accumulate in distant places. And then we also added the first carbon nanotubes, the first nanosubstance to the SIN list in 2019. So in 2023, we have a PFAS update, adding like almost 400 PFAS substances to the SIN list. And next week, there will be a new update from SIN to WIN. So this will be a new update. We're adding even new substances and new toxic substance groups. And we are more than welcome to take part in that launch. So, talking about the success factors, I think we have, in the beginning, we really didn't know we didn't have a name for the SIN list. We called an NGO priority list. We didn't really know what to do and how to do it. So that was the first year. It took a lot of time just to understand what we were going to do. But in the end, we came up with a strategy and how we should do things. But I think these are the most important things that has been the success factors of the SIN list: the strategy, the scientific integrity, and of course the timing, because you need to have a hook to get if you're going to spread it and have a good spread through communication-wise. But also building alliances, find your friends and work together with them. And of course, communication, how to communicate. So the strategy with the first SIN list, it was actually to identify chemicals that meet the REACH criteria for substances of very high concern, ZDHCs. That was our strategy, because we want to assist the official candidate list process. We want to prioritize chemicals for phase out. We want to offer guidance to companies, consumers, and regulators. And we want to promote safer alternatives. So this was a strategy from 18 years ago. And I would say actually this slide is from 18 years ago. And we have today exactly the same strategy, the same focus, the same strategy. So that is really something that has been living on through every single version of the SIN list. Talking about scientific integrity. And this is also something that has been the same from the start until now, because we're good at policy, we're good at chemicals, but we are no toxicologists. So I'm not a toxicologist, I'm a chemical engineer, but for all the versions of the SIN list, we've always been using external experts, the best in the field on the specific topic we're talking about. In the first SIN list, it's for ecotoxicologists and human toxicologists taking the decisions or performing the assessments more correctly. We have endocrinologists when we're talking about EDC substances and endocrine experts. When talking about PBTs and PMTs, it was more about environmental fate experts, how to assess the persistence of a chemical, how it can be treated as a mobile, how to assess if it's really bioaccumulative or not. So that has been, they've been doing the groundwork, external people hired by us. And then we always had a second opinion by independent reviewers. So when we had the data for a number of substances that we saw, okay, this is enough, we sent that to for independent review for them to assess, to have their opinion. is this really up to the mark? Can we really say that this is a substance of very high concern? And that is really the focus, because the sin list always need to have substances that fulfill the REACH criteria of substances of very high concern. Again, this has been one of the strategies we've been talking about from the very start with the sin list. But it's also important to know that it's ChemSec. We always take the final decision if a substance should be on the sin list in the end or not. So the experts and the reviewers, they always come with an opinion, and then we take the decision, because we can't say, they told us it should be okay. No, it's our responsibility, it's our name on the list, we take the decision. And of course, timing, it's difficult to choose a perfect time. But for the sin list, it was perfect with regard to the REACH regulation. And especially when we started the work with the sin list, there was no substances that had been called a substance of very high concern. There were criteria for it. Yes, of course, we had the criteria, Article 57 in REACH. So it's a definition, the hard definition of substance of very high concern, but no substance had been identified. The week after, I think it was 1 or 2 weeks after that we launched the sin list, that was the first nominations for the actual candidate list in REACH, the official candidate list. And timing also allowed us to use official guidance documents, how to assess, how to make a dossier, how to assess the substances if they fulfill their criteria or not. So this was really a golden moment, I would say, from our perspective. They can really tie everything together. So we had to be relevant, but it's not restricted to REACH. So of course, anyone can use the same criteria to identify the worst chemicals. And that's why also users from all the world are using the sin list, because it's very useful to find the hazardous substances. And of course, building alliances. If you have more friends that share your opinion, share your views, it's very good to ask them to share the burden as well. Because in the beginning, we had a lot from the chemical industry. This is an NGO wish list, and actually there were more people from the European chemicals manufacturer in the room than ChemSec people when we launched the first sin list. There were more people of them just to be there to say it's a wish list. It's not connected to regulation, everything, trying to play it down as much as possible. But then we had our friends from downstream users. They were there speaking up. We had our friends from other more well-known NGOs speaking up. We had policymakers there speaking up. We had the authorities in place speaking up. So all those made it very difficult for the chemical industry to play down the road of the sin list. So this is really a very important thing from our perspective that really helped us to reach out and show the need for the sin list. More lately, in the beginning, we had no investors work together with sin list. Now it's a very, very important part that we have also building alliances together with investors. So, moving over to communication. I think this is really a very, very important topic. You can have the best science, you can have everything so good in place, but if you can't communicate it, it's lost. No one bothers to read a 200-page report, page up, page down, just pure text. They needed to have the condensed, especially policymakers. Often they needed to have a very condensed, clear, to the point, what does it mean? So we have always chosen to have a positive and solution-oriented communication style from ChemSec. So we show what is good, but also it has to be simple and factual. And also with a touch of humor often helps as well. So as an example, we're talking about PFAS. So we're not saying just PFAS is really bad, everyone knows that. So how can we help you in identifying the most relevant PFAS so you can start substituting? So we're providing a solution, not just a problem. We're talking about communication and simplicity. Because what you see here on the right, that is the actual way how a substance should be nominated and go through the regulatory process to be considered a substance of very high concern and on the official authorization list. It's a bit too complex for most people to understand. So to avoid paralysis by analysis, I think we have to move away from this and we have to make it more simple. So this is it. We're showing the numbers. These are the substances actually fulfilling the criteria. And this, the number 16, was the first candidate list, 16 substances. We had 267 substances on the first SIN list 2 weeks before. So of the 16, how many are actually, the 16 have been nominated. Okay, 15 made it to the candidate list. And then the agency working list. Just showing the numbers is very important. And also, this is the way it should go. So you can show to policymakers, okay, everyone knows we have more than 1,500 substances we need to take care of, and you have listed 7. Is that good or bad? So it's very factual. It's still following the full process, but it's captured in an easy to grasp way. And then last but not least, with regard to communication, I think the humor. And I think, for example, we have the product. It's for the launch of the SIN list. We have the links here if you want to watch them. I highly recommend them. And we had the rap battle against PFAS. It's a really nice piece. And I think this is also something, even the chemical industry, they find this amusing. So they understand, we get to the point, it's everywhere. For example, with PFAS, and the lyrics are just wonderful. I just love it. And just to show the impact of the SIN list, on the left is from substances from the first SIN list, and to the right from the, they're both from the first and second SIN list here. And almost all these substances has actually gone through regulatory scrutiny. So they are either restricted, they're on authorization list, on the candidate list. And in the beginning, we had 94% accuracy. So of all the substances that ended up on the official candidate list, we already had them before in 94% of the cases. So that showed it's a good way to stay ahead of regulation. So that has been the past, but where are we today? We are going from 267 the first year, and now we have 1,452 entries in the SIN list. It's kind of difficult to talk about individual chemicals because sometimes a chemical, for example, could be a salt, which you have many different versions, but it's have the same substance still. But the SIN list has 13,000 or more than 13,000 registered users and more than 135,000 visits every year. So it's really, really frequently used. And actually the biggest country is US. We have most visits from the US, followed by Sweden, Germany, France, and so on. And what we can see from surveys and from our user base, the main users are actually for the chemical industry or downstream users. So that's the most frequent user that we have on the SIN list today. So that has been a very short retrospective show of the SIN list. But I would like to also mention that next week in Brussels, we will have an event where we will bring new substances to the SIN list and we'll bring new kinds of substance groups to the SIN list. So stay sharp and you'll see what will happen in next week. So, and with that, I hope I finished in time. I was given 20 minutes, so it was 19 and 10 seconds, according to my watch. So I hope you're fine, Pam. Thank you very much.
I'm very fine. And I have to say, your humorous and simple communication style has been incredibly helpful for those of us who aren't in a position to be humorous because we're part of a regulatory agency or whatever. I just absolutely love what ChemSec puts out there, and I really encourage everybody to look at those wonderful videos. But also, thank you so much for kind of leading the path forward on identifying chemicals that we need to be very careful of. We have, 50 seconds? So does anybody have a question for Jirka that you'd like to pose right now? We will have Q&A at the end of this, but I want to give you the opportunity. I don't think so. I think we'll wait. So what I'd like to do, thank you again. Such a great presentation, such a great tool. And ChemSec has developed many tools, as Jirka pointed out. And so, encourage everyone to take a look at them because I think they're incredibly helpful. So again, thank you. And what I'd like to do now is to introduce.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. I'd love to introduce our next speaker, Pushkar from ZDHC. Pushkar is the Technical Manager in Sustainable Chemicals Management Group, and he leads the review and development of the ZDHC Manufacturers Restricted Substances List. So Pushkar, if you want to go ahead and share your slides, we'd love to hear about your approach to this very challenging topic. Perfect.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Pam. Can you see my screen?
Yes, it's just right. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much and good morning, everyone. If anyone is from other time zone, good afternoon, evening to the respective people. I'm Dr. Pushkar Shizwalkar. I'm working as a Sustainable Chemical Management Technical Manager at the Competence Centers in the ZDHC, which is Zero Discharge of Hazardous Chemicals. I would like to thank Pam as well as Turi for giving me an opportunity and inviting me to explain our efforts in mitigating the challenges of usage and discharge of hazardous chemicals from the supply chain of TAFL industry, as we call, which is a textile, apparel, footwear, and leather manufacturing industry, through our unique Roadmap to Zero program. Now, this webinar, the slides will be shared to you, all of you, so you don't have to worry about that. And in the presentation, you will see a few slides in the starting and towards the end, which are more of an information slides that I'll be giving. They are required in a way because that will give us a complete roadmap approach that we are using, without which it is a little bit difficult for me to explain the MRSL in general. But the initial slides I'll just go through very quickly so that we can spend more time on understanding the preparation of the MRSL in general. Thank you very much for that, and I hope that's okay. So at ZDHC, our vision describes the perfect world as we would like to see us. It emphasizes the impact of the chemicals used in the manufacturing processes with respect to the life environment in terms of land, air, and water. While doing so, ZDHC would like to increase the efforts to measure the impact to ensure that the methods adopted are credible and backed up by solid, verifiable data as well. And our mission, which is intent to achieve our vision, is stayed laser focus on our sustainable chemical management across the global value chain, which includes and is not limited only to the textile, leather, apparel, footwear industries, which means that we are going to expand our program to the other industries as well. And this includes our stakeholders, which is, for example, brands, the suppliers, or manufacturers, or chemical formulators, and our solution providers as well. And we intend to achieve it by reducing the usage of harmful chemicals through safer substitution or by improving the chemical processes, which leads to the more efficient use and reuse of the chemicals. As you can imagine, the challenge that we have undertaken is huge, and therefore it is just not possible for any organization to do it alone. So to transform the industry, we must collaborate with different segments of the value chain and the industry, and we therefore completely believe in the collaboration approach. And this therefore also provides some transparency and a commitment from the industry as well. Increasingly, we see that the brands, the retailers, and their supply chains are implementing chemical and/or environmental management program within the value chain. And in the early days, many of these tools and the guidelines are slightly different in their requirements and the approach. However, they are similar in nature. ZDHC program to zero serves as a way to incorporate this key element and converge the industry with a single framework. And this aims to support the industry not to duplicate the efforts and not to confuse or burden the suppliers with the multiple efforts. And this single aligned global framework therefore focuses on environmental protection by setting the standards for the industry, by supporting the adoption and the convergence, and also accelerate the implementation to ensure the positive impact we make sure that it is impacted positively. And in addition to the contributors, the ZDHC also engages with all the parts of the industry and other stakeholders as well. This includes brands and retailers who are not necessarily in the contributorship per se, as well as all types of suppliers, chemical formulators, a range of solution providers, for example, auditors, laboratories, etc. This basically supports us to quickly, efficiently implement a roadmap to zero program. We also, however, engage with the industry associations for industry alignment to make sure that whatever the process that we are carrying out is in alignment with the industry requirement and is pragmatic as well. Not to shut down the industries, basically. We also engage with the academia and other public sectors. Under the ZDHC Foundation, there are three key pillars. First is the Roadmap to Zero program, which is a program which is responsible for developing the tool and the guidelines for the textile, footwear, and leather industry. That is where I'm basically from. That is the part of the ZDHC that I represent, and this includes the preparation of the ZDHC MRSL, wastewater guidelines, etc. We also have a second pillar, which is on the ZDHC Academy, which supports the capacity building for the value chain. It supports the member of value chain in understanding the tools and the guidelines of the Roadmap to Zero, as we call RTZ program, as well as good chemical management practices that supports the mission of ZDHC and the aligned global framework for the industry. And the third is basically an implementation hub, which supports on-ground implementation of the tools and the guidelines that are developed by the RTZ program. It supports the scaling, adoption of these tools and guidelines. Furthermore, it is also a place to encourage innovation in the industry and to drive best practices. All these three pillars in the ZDHC Foundation are intrinsically linked together with each other, and therefore they work together to ensure the industry are able to implement these agreed upon tool and guidance without the duplication of the effort. In the interest of time, we will be focusing, and that is what our topic for today is also, which is the MRSL. So we will not be talking about the other two pillars. We will be only talking about the Roadmap to Zero program. Now, Roadmap to Zero program is a holistic system that covers the key aspect of the sustainable chemical management, which we call it SCM. This includes the input, that anything that comes on your supplier's facility, then the entire process that happens, and then the outcome, the output, as we call. And therefore, there are tools that we have provided and the guidelines that are available to support at each step, at each aspect of this sustainable chemical management. For example, in input, we talk about the MRSL and the conformance guidance. That is what we will be again focusing on. So you can imagine the program is relatively big and little bit complicated in a way, but at the same time, if you narrow it down, basically what I'm going to talk about is only on the input side of the material. And then there are process, which is basically helping the supplier to efficiently implement and implement the chemical management systems. Also, we talk about the output, which is basically a wastewater in a way, but we are also now working on the air emissions as well as the sludge, which is basically considered as an output. So we can you can have more details on, you can get it more the details from our Roadmap to Zero website. But for the time being, and this is basically a holistic system approach that we are working on. So these are very glimpses of what we are working on, which is the input. We have this document, this guideline, and then the lower portion, if you see, these are the tools that we provide at each and every step for the suppliers, which is input, process, and output. So as you can see, the box is basically the implementation guidelines, and the lower bottom part is the tools that we provide. However, as we have only going to talk about the MRSL, we'll be talking the main focus area for us, which is a ZDHC MRSL and its supporting documents, which is a conformance guidance and principles and procedure documents. So all this information is available online, and you can get it for free from roadmap20.com website. When ZDHC MRSL was launched, we heard the voice from the suppliers, and suppliers said we purchase chemicals and the use of chemicals during the production, but we are not the ones who make the chemical recipe, so we don't know whether those hazardous chemicals are being used in these formulations. And that's where the MRSL comes into the picture. And we basically ask the formulator to check their formulation for the absence of these MRSL listed substances through a system approach, and then upload them on something called as a gateway, through which these formulations can be sourced, basically, which is a chemical module. Okay. So this is the background of what the Roadmap to Zero program looks like. And now we'll get into the input part, which is the MRSL. Now, MRSL is the manufacturing restricted substances list. As you can see, by definition, it's a list of chemical substances which are banned from the intentional use in the commercial formulation used at the facility that process textile, apparel, leather, and the footwear processes or footwear products. MRSL is basically it's not to be used intentionally, but please note, therefore, the limit values that are given in the MRSL are only the maximum allowable concentration for unintentional contamination. So under any circumstances, the substances not to be used intentionally, there's a possibility that you could
Pushkar, are you still there? I think you have frozen. Heather, is he also frozen on your end?
I can't hear him. I don't see his picture.
Yeah, I apologize, folks. I think I might have jinxed things when I noted early on that things happen in webinars, and apparently, unfortunately, it looks like something has happened on Pushkar's end. So yeah, I think we've lost him. I'm so sorry about that, folks, but what we'll do, right, low network bandwidth is an issue. So I apologize, and really just want to thank Pushkar for sharing information about the work that they're doing with the textile, apparel, footwear, and leather processing industry sector. And so all of his slides will be available, including links to some of the things that he has talked about or would have talked about. What we'll do now, because we have a little time, is go ahead and
there he is.
Oh, Pam?
Yeah.
He's back.
Pam,
I'm sorry, you're still kind of in and out, Pushkar.
am I audible now, or still there is a problem?
You're audible.
Yeah. Do you want me to continue, or are we like out of time?
We have a couple more minutes, so if you want to get right to the to the meat of what you wanted to make sure you covered, that would be great. And then we'll open it up for Q&A.
Yeah, sure. Sorry for that. Sorry for there was some problem with the internet probably. That's why. So very quickly, I'll go through to the main MRSL list. The MRSL list is divided into 3 chapters, which is MRSL, the main MRSL list, which is the substances banned from the intentional use. We also have a list called as a candidate list, which we pose or we know that they are challenging, and this is a most pragmatic list, and that is why we have an intent for these list substances to take it into the main MRSL list, but currently there are no scalable alternatives possible, and that is why we have put it as an indication or indication for the industries to work upon on. And then we also have an archive list, which is we believe that has been phased out and are no longer expected to be used. Please note that archive list is still the ban list, so you should not be using it anyhow. This is what our MRSL looks like. You can go on the website that I have shared the link with earlier. And then if you go to the input and the MRSL, you should be able to get this live list, the MRSL, ZDHC MRSL list. Every chemical that is listed in the MRSL is categorized based on the group, and each group is given with some information as to where it will be used in the textile value chain, along with the substance, the CAS number, its applicability, some supplier guidance with the formulation limit, which is an unintentional, mind you, it's not the main, it's not to be used intentionally, and also a general technique for analyzing that chemical from the formulation. Some fact about MRSL is that we have about 19 substances or chemical groups. In the interest of time, I'll not be going into the great detail, but you can check it online. We also have the candidate list, which includes bisphenols, ethoxylated taloamines, and other groups and substances. And we also have the archive list, which is in the chapter 3. How does the MRSL list is prepared? We have a submission platform. So this is what our main interest is. So we have something called as a submission platform, the link for which is already given here. You can go online and put your submissions into it. And those submissions will be then discussed with our external counseling experts from the industry, which we call them MRSL Council. The MRSL Council consists of representatives from different stakeholders, including association, NGOs, and other solution providers, etc., which then internally discusses and categorize the substances into the candidate list or the main MRSL list or the archive list. What makes the substances to be listed in the MRSL? There are several reasons for a substance that can be come into the MRSL list, but I think we all aware of the symbols. They are not really the GHS symbol, by the way. I have just tried to be more creative on this, so I have taken that opportunity to be a little bit more creative. And when we do the MRSL conformance, basically level 1 is something which is done through the analytical testing approach, whereas if you go with the higher confidence, the more you know about the formulation, the higher the level that you can achieve. So from level 1 to level 2 and level 3 is an on-site assessment for the formulator to understand the chemical hazard assessment. So level 3 is the highest level of confidence that you can get for the formulation.
Pushkar, thank you so much. If I apologize, but I really would like to leave a little bit of time for some quick Q&A.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and again, sorry about the glitch, and I think I jinxed us early on when we were talking about it, but all of your slides will be available. So
Yes.
we just have a few minutes left, and I want to open this up for question Q&A with anybody. We had one question about talking about the process for identifying alternatives. So what sources and tools does the Tura program use? And just acknowledging that there are two sides to the question. One is, what are the chemicals we're concerned about? and the other is, what are the safer alternatives? So could somebody from the tour program perhaps respond to that question about identifying safer alternatives?
Yeah, I was trying to type in the chat for that. So somebody asked about tools, and I wanted to mention, for cleaning and for solvents, we have cleaner solutions. I put the link to that in the chat. For other chemicals, I was in the process of typing this answer. It really varies. We might find alternatives in the literature. We might find them from staff experiences, communication with other states, by novel research here at Turi. There's a lot of different ways that we're identifying alternatives, the same ways that we would teach planners to look for alternatives in class, in the TERP class. So yeah, it can really be varied depending on, what we're looking for the alternative for.
Right. We have a comment and a question here for you, Pushkar. The ZDHC is a great preventive approach, especially as we know how synthetics add to the microplastic pollution issue, and those chemicals permeate the environment. So any thoughts on how ZDHC can try to prevent microplastics from textiles?
Yeah, so we are in collaboration with the Microfiber Consortium, and we are working. So as I said, I very focused only on the input chemicals. We have a guidelines for the wastewater which is going to incorporate the microfibers also into the picture. But if you have any specific, if you want to know more information, I can share that link to you. But yes, we are working on that as well.
And it's a tricky subject. I don't know, Jirka, has ChemSec been thinking about the microplastics issue on your end?
We haven't. Yeah, to a certain extent, yes, but we haven't really taken a decision how to deal with it. We don't have any microplastic, for example, on the sin list as of now. But for example, we wouldn't include something with microplastic as a safe alternative on marketplace, for example.
Right,
so right. That's a clear no-go. But we haven't found a process to identify those.
Right. So, and thank you for sharing the link to the marketplace, which is another really great resource for safer solutions. This is our challenge as industry professionals, and as international organizations seeking to create a safer chemicals economy, so that we can continue to make great products that support society, and do so in a way that is safer, both in the work environment and in the use environment and at the end of use. So I want to again thank each and every one of our speakers. This has been really terrific. I apologize for the technical issues. We will be posting all of the slides on our website. And again, thank you. And you can all enjoy the rest of your day and think about the importance of really looking at what the hazard chemicals that you're using are, and trying to move away from them. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.